the inimitability of the Quran. Every Muslim, whether they are radical, whether they are nominal, whether they are liberal, will all make these claims. They will say first and foremost that the Quran is uncreated. It always has existed. In Surah 85, Ayah 22, it's very clear that these are the eternal tablets. These are the eternal tablets which exist in heaven, from which the angel Gabriel was then given to piecemeal over a period of 22 years, 23 years, to a man named Muhammad living in Mecca and Medina. Uncreated, sent down to this man Muhammad over that 22-year period, and that was finally completed not at the time that Muhammad was living, but at the time that Uthman had it canonized in 652. Every Muslim will say it was completed in 652. So 652, Uthman then canonizes the Quran, and then according to every Muslim that it's unchanged from that time period. So if you could just remember 4 words: uncreated, sent down, completed, unchanged. Can you remember those 4 words? That's all you have to ask a Muslim. Oh, that's much better. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. So there's the 4 words you need to know. If you could just remember those 4 words, you can pretty well destroy the Quran by asking them, because they then have to come up with a defense. Now, there's no way that we can really confront the first 2. Uncreated, sent down, that happened hundreds of years ago. We're not there. By the way, I see people taking notes. Stop your notes. You're not going to keep up. Just put your notes down. I will give you the PowerPoint at the end, okay? You can all have the PowerPoint. It doesn't cost a thing. So what we can do is confront these next 2. The next 2. That is completed and unchanged. These 2 here. That's all you need to confront. Show me one Quran that is complete and unchanged from the 7th century. That's all you need to ask. So let's go on. Let's head on right down. This is what we know as the immutability of the Quran. Now, we can say as Christians that we know the Bible is not eternal. It's created. We know who wrote it. We even give the names to the authors on many of the books. It was sent down? No, it was not sent down. Inspired? Yes, but not sent down through an angel Gabriel. Complete? Yes, that's the only claim we will say in the original text. It was complete. But we don't have the originals today, for none of them. Unchanged? Yes, of course it's been changed. We know where it's been changed. We are transparent about it. We even put in the margins, we put up in footnotes where the changes are. We know that there are about 41 verses that are in doubt in the New Testament. John chapter 7 verse 53 to John chapter 8 verse 11. Those are not in the earliest Greek manuscripts. The last part of Mark chapter 16 verse 9 to 20 are not in the earliest Greek manuscript. They could be originals, but we don't know because we don't have any of the originals. Okay, so we are very open. We would never make these claims. All right? So we're talking about 2 different reference points for our revelation. Don't let the Muslims hang you on that. Now, what do Muslim leaders say? Well, here you have Fethullah Gulen, who's in Pennsylvania. Only one Quran, unaltered, unedited, and untampered. Then you have Suzan Hanif, preserved today in its original form. Here you have Abdullah Yusuf Ali, who wrote the Yusuf Ali translation in the 1930s. Not even a single letter has changed. Maulvi Muhammad Ali, not even a diacritical point has changed. Dr. Shabarati, I've debated him 6 times. He will no longer debate me after 2014 because of what we showed him in 2014. Exactly identical for over 1,300 years. And then later on, he puts it back to 1,400 years. The text was known through memory work and through the written materials, including the Tashkent, which is the Samarkand that we're going to talk about today. The difference from that copy to what we're to read today is we find no differences. He no longer says that because of the material that I'm going to introduce today. Now, what is my written today? We can't critique the uncreated part. We can't critique the complete part. Thus, what we want to find is one Quran. I'm only asking for one Quran. That's all I want. From the mid-7th century, that is complete. That means all 114 surahs, and is exactly the same today as that manuscript that they can show me. That's all I'm asking for. That's not too much to ask for. We have the Sinaiticus right there in the British Library that is 1,700 years old. Take a look at it. You can go and see it. It's completely transparent. You can get the entire manuscript online. So I'm going to do 6 things today. I'm going to look at the 2 compilations. I'm going to look at the 6 earliest manuscripts, the changes in the earliest manuscripts, the 2 layers of the Sana manuscripts, the look at the 4 carbon dating lab reports, and then I'm looking at the 31 Arabic Qurans. Now that's an awful lot to get through in 1 hour. Bear with me. That's why I say put your pens down. You're not going to keep up. The 2 compilations. What are we talking about? In the Quran, in order to know how the Quran was put together, you need to go to the Hadith. You need to go to Sahih Bukhari. You need to go to volume 6, Hadith number 509 and 510. These are the classic account of how the Quran was put together. In the first 609, it says that Abu Bakr was given the responsibility to a man named Zayd ibn Thabit, who was a secretary of Muhammad. He was given that responsibility to write the Quran, the very first recension, the first copy of the Quran. Zayd ibn Thabit did not want to do it. He thought it would be too difficult. He said, how can I do something that Muhammad did not do? Then he finally acquiesced when Abu Bakr and both Umar forced him to do so. So he went to palm stalks, stones, and memories of surviving warriors and compiled what he could find. He gave that copy to the daughter of Umar named Hafsa, who was also one of the wives of Muhammad, and she put it under her bed and kept it there for roughly 20 years. Then we have Al-Bukhari chapter 5 verse 610. The very next section of the Hadith comes and talks about the second recension. So now we have a need for a second copy. Second time, Uthman realizes that there are many Qurans in existence that are disagreeing with each other. So he asks Zayd ibn Thabit to take that one that Hafsa had, to bring it there to him, and then to rewrite it. He gives that job to Zayd ibn Thabit along with Zubair Alas and Hisham. So 4 of them are to rewrite the Quran. If they have any problems between them, if they have any debate between them, they're to do it in the Qurayshi dialect. Arab speakers, what is wrong with that right there? Why is that impossible? Those who are Arab speakers. In order to have dialectic differences in Arabic, you have to have the Dhamma, the Kasra, and the Fattah, right? Where was the Dhamma, Kasra, and Fattah in the 7th century? They were only invented in the late 8th century. So how can you even have this as a problem? Well, take a look at who's writing this. Al-Bukhari, he lived in 870, the late 9th century. He's talking about a problem in the late 9th century and he's redacting it back to the 7th century, but anybody who knows Arabic knows that this is impossible to have happen. Are you following me? You at least follow what I'm saying. And this is why Arabs, you need to start arguing this. This is why you need to, as Arab speakers, you need to get up and you need to say this is impossible. Obviously, why have Arab speakers not noticed this? Let's move on. Then he takes that one final copy and he sends it to 9 different cities: Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria. We went down to Aden, Herat, and Nishapur. That's 9 cities. That means we should have 9 copies of the Quran in existence today. Not 4, like they have always been saying. We should have 9, according to Al-Bukhari, volume 6, 510. But then he did a very curious thing. After he sent it to the 9 provinces, he then ordered that all the Quranic materials, whether written or fragmentary manuscripts or whole copies, be burnt. Why do you burn manuscripts? Unless they all disagree and you want to destroy the evidence. Now, why haven't we said this? Why aren't people talking about this? Can you see the problem? Just as this is their own material, I'm not making this up. Any Muslim knows who Al-Bukhari is. It's Sahih Bukhari. That means he's perfect. There is no error in this. Now, here's the questions. Why didn't God choose a language which could have accommodated the Quran? Here we already have Greek and Hebrew that God had already used. Why didn't he choose another language which had no diacritical marks, had no vowelization, had no Dhamma, Kasra, or Fattah? Why would he choose a language that could even accommodate his final revelation if it's the greatest revelation? That's the first question. Secondly, why did he choose a man who couldn't even read and write to give his greatest revelation to? And how long does it take to read and write Arabic? It took me 2 weeks to read and write Arabic. Muhammad already knew Arabic. He had 22 years to learn to read and write. More than that, why didn't he use his secretary? He had a secretary that whole time. What do secretaries do if they don't write? So for 22 years, he wrote nothing down. And then why did Abu Bakr make copies of it like Uthman did 20 years later and send it to the 9 provinces? Why do we have to wait another 20 years before it was finally set out? These are questions you need to ask. How could there be diacritical differences in the mid-7th century? The dialectical differences don't even begin to appear until the 8th century. The vowelization doesn't begin to appear until the 9th century. See, these are, should anybody who reads or writes Arabic should know these arguments. And then why in the world did he burn all the existing manuscripts that disagreed with the manuscript that he finally retained? 4th question, where are the copies of the Quran sent to those 9 cities? 1400 years, that's not very long ago. So we have the New Testament, we have 3 manuscripts from the New Testament alone, 2 in London, 1 in Rome, that are from the 4th century. And the 5th century, we also have the Alexandrinus from the 5th century, the entire Old and New Testament in the British Library. If we can come up with 365 either complete or partial manuscripts for the New Testament by the 6th century, why can't they even come up with 1 manuscript from the 1st century? Sorry, from the 7th century. We've got to ask Muslims this. So, if Uthman standardized the Quran to just 1 copy, are there now a multiplicity of different Arabic Qurans today? We'll get to that. So, let's look at what the Islamic traditions say. Now, this is their own traditions. I'm just going to quote them. Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Ibn Dawud, Jaid Tirmidhi, Sunan Sugra, Sunan of the Ibn Majah. Those are the 6 major traditions. These are the 6 most authoritative traditions. And you can see how many hadith they have for each one. We'll have to go really quickly so you can read this for yourself. When you look at what they're saying, they say that some of the verses were lost, according to Ibn Dawud. Here we have As-Suyuti, who says, let none of you say I have acquired the whole of the Quran. How does he know what all of it is when much of the Quran has disappeared? Rather let him say I have acquired what has survived. Now, that means he's already admitting that much of the Quran has disappeared. Some of the verses were forgotten, according to Sahih Muslim. Some verses were canceled, according to Sahih Bukhari. Other verses went missing, according to Sahih Bukhari again. Some verses were overlooked, according to Ibn Abi Dawud. Some verses were changed, according to Muwatta, Ibn Malik. Some verses were modified, according to Ibn Abi Wara. You can read all these in your own time. These are just for you to get to know what they're saying. So obviously the 9th century compilers and the 10th century compilers had no problems that much of the Quran was lost. So why are Muslims in the 21st century saying it was complete and unchanged? Some verses were substituted, according to Sahih Bukhari. And then some verses were even eaten by sheep, according to Ibn Majah. So, lost, disappeared, forgotten, canceled, missing, overlooked, changed, modified, substituted, eaten by sheep. Does this sound like a book which was compiled perfectly and completely? It's very clear from these hadith quotes that there was a good bit of the intentional human intervention from the very beginning. Human intervention. I'm going to say that over and over again, you'll see why. Let's go then to these are the 6 earliest manuscripts. These are considered by all scholars to be the original Quran. And for many years, when I started working in Islam back 37 years ago, this is all I heard. These are the original manuscripts. Now, there's no way that I could dispute it because I was not given access to these manuscripts. None of us were given access to these manuscripts. We now have access to all of them. And every one of them is on that computer right back there. We now have we have complete facsimiles of all of them today. 9 codices were sent to 9 cities, just to remind you. 4 now, according to the Islamic traditions, this is what Arbery found in the 1930s. He just went and read from the Islamic traditions, and he found that there was one codex that was put together by Ubay ibn Ka'b in Damascus. It had 115 chapters. There's another one that was put together in Baghdad by Ubdal ibn Masud. It had 111 chapters. Another one by Ibn Musa in Basra. It had 116 chapters. The one that was put together by Zayd ibn Thabit had the 114 that we use today. So even the early traditions were not aware of how many chapters there were in the Quran. This is their own material that admits this. So certainly, early on, this was not a problem. But let's take a look at these manuscripts. And these are the 6 major manuscripts here. The Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the Petropolitan, the Huzayni, and the Sana manuscript, probably the most exciting. Let's start with the Topkapi. This is the one that they are now reducing to. And back when I started working with Islam and when I started debating this material, and back in 1995, they said these 6 manuscripts. By the time we got up to 2006 and 2007, they had reduced it really to about 4 of them. By the time we got to the debate in 2014, they reduced it only to 1 manuscript, and that's this one here. So it makes my job so easy. All I have to do is destroy this manuscript. This is the last one they got, because this is the best of all the 6. But let's take a look at, this is the Topkapi manuscript. This one was in the Topkapi Museum. If you go to Istanbul there in Turkey, you will find it. This one is in London. This one is, the Petropolis is in Paris. The Husseini is in Cairo, and the Sana is in Yemen. Let's see what the scholars say, and we need to go to these 2 scholars. This is Professor Dr. Ekmeluddin İhsanoğlu, who is the founding director of IRSISA, Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Conference Research Center, and this man here. This is probably the better of the 2, Dr. Tayyar Altıkılıç, both Turkish. They are the ones that are responsible for the Topkapi, but this is the man that really has done the most devastating work. He is the one that controls the Topkapi and is considered to be the leading authority in the Muslim world on early Arabic manuscripts. That's why you need to listen to him when he speaks. He says, and this is what he says, and this is a survey that was done between 2002 and 2007. For 5 years, they went to all the 6 manuscripts. They came up with their survey. By 2009, it was printed. I got a copy in 2013 in English, which you can get, and I can give it to you. It's on my computer. That's all you need to read is their introduction. It's 83 pages long, and see what they say. This is the material that I introduced in my 2014 debate, which you can get online as well. We have none of Uthman's Musafs. None of them exist. He was very clear on that. Nor do we have any copies from those Musafs. These Musafs date from the later Umayyad period. The Umayyad period goes from 661 up till 750. The later Umayyad period means the 8th century. He is very clear that they're all 8th century manuscripts. Dr. Altıkılıç, no serious scholarly work has been done on any of them. These Musafs date from the early to mid 8th century. They are not Uthmanic nor copies sent by him. He starts by the Topkapi, and he says, this is I'm sorry that it's all been washed out, but it looks very good on you when it's on your computer. You'll get a much better picture of it. But when you look at the diacritical marks, you will see he dates it to the second half of the 1st century AH, which would be from 661 up till 719, and the first half of the 2nd century, which would be 719 up to 770. Be careful, Muslims will think this is AD. This is not AD, this is AH, after Hijrah. And he does it by looking the voweling and the dating. And he says, even though we would like to publish this sacred text as a Musaf of Caliph Uthman, our research indicated that it was neither the private Musaf of Caliph Uthman nor one of the Musafs he sent to various centers. So he's very clear these are not the earliest manuscripts. Conclusion, there are derivations from grammatical rules and spelling mistakes. He found 2,270 variants. That means words and phrases that are different in that manuscript than the Quran we have today. Ooh, Can you see it makes my job so easy? All I have to do is quote him.
Those are consonantal.
These are okay, did you hear what he said? These are consonantal differences. We'll get into that a little later. You'll see what we're talking about. Now, you can see here, you know what we conceal, what he revealed in the Topkapi in Surah 14. Now it's become, you know what we can conceal and what we reveal. See, we or he. You can see it changes as to who is doing the revealing there. Here's another one of Surah 3, Ayah 158. You shall not be gathered versus before him you shall undoubtedly be gathered. That completely changes the meaning. So these are hugely significant. The Samarkand manuscript. The Samarkand, which is probably one of the most famous because it's been around the world. They brought it to London about 5 years ago. It's a monumental text. It's dated to the early to mid 8th century. It was considered to be the best preserved manuscript, the one that is complete and Uthmanic. It is now an embarrassment. There's undisciplined spelling throughout. It has different writing styles. It has scribal mistakes, copyist mistakes, written by someone with little experience and with later additions. And it only goes up to Surah 43. There's 114 surahs in the Quran. But even amongst those Surah 40, up to Surah 43, take a look at this. There is only one complete surah in that entire manuscript. 24 of the surahs are partial, 16 don't even exist. So much of it is missing. Why haven't we been told that before? The Ma'il manuscript, which is in London. This one we do know about. This one has been well around. It's the 2165 manuscript. It has a slanted text. That's why it's called Ma'il, which is what it means in Arabic. It is written in the Hijazi style, which is an earlier style than the Abbasid. So it should be one of the earliest. It only goes up to Surah 43. 53% of the Quran is missing. Al-Takulich dates it to the early 8th century. Dr. Martin Lings, who did the most extensive work on it, dates it to the late 8th century, around 790. Okay, Al-Huzayni text. Now sometimes that's spelled with a Y, sometimes it's spelled with an I. Either or is correct. The Huzayni Cairo Musaf is the early mid-8th century. It is also a monumental text. It's huge, which means it's a much later manuscript. This is not Uthmanic according to Al-Takulich. It is dated from the early to mid-century, 8th century. It also has enormous number of variants. You can see a variant here, and it has these coverings. Do you see these coverings there? Can you see these coverings? That means they're changing the text. We'll get into that. Covering over the text, signifying hiding or centering the original written text. Then we have the Parasino Petropolitanus there in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. And this one here is controlled by Dr. Francois Doroche. He is the one that's done the most study on it. The largest, it's a number of different manuscripts in a compilation of manuscript collection. The largest only contains 26% of the Quran. So where is this complete Quran they keep talking about? 26%. And even amongst the 26, there are 93 variants just within the mark that we do and are able to read. 5 different copies, later modifications. The largest is 26%, another one is 15%, another one is only 4.2%. Here you can see a difference between the Petropolitanus and the Cairene text. And is then changed to so, which changes the meaning of the text. Then we get to the Sana, and this is my favorite because this one is probably the most damaging. Because this is the one, and this is the most recently discovered in 1975. When they discovered it in 1975, they noticed that it had no diacritical marks, it had no vowelization, they couldn't read it. So they brought 3 German scholars who are considered to be the world's authority on the Arabic text from Saarbrücken University in Saarland University in Saarbrücken, and they flew them down to Yemen to investigate this manuscript in 1981. Dr. Gerhard Quinn, Dr. von Bothmer, and Dr. Oleg. The 3 doctors, all of them looked at it and immediately they realized there was a problem, so they took pictures of it. Those pictures were confiscated by the Yemeni government and only released to them until in 1997. I went to see Dr. Gerhard Quinn, and he showed me this facsimile from his own photos. And this is Surah 19 over here, and then right there where the yellow mark it jumps to Surah 22. So that's Surah 19, that's Surah 22. This script is dated to 705. But he said, what happened to Surah 20 and 21? Well, 20 suddenly appears over here. Can you see that there are 2 different scripts? Yeah. You can see that right away. This is a much later script. This script here is probably 60 years later. So that's 705, that's late 8th century. 2 different scripts. Take a look at every one of those orange marks. See those orange marks? Every time you see an orange mark, that's a variant. That means a word or phrase that's different in that manuscript from the Quran we have today. He's counted over 1,000. This has yet to be published, by the way. This is yet to be published. Conclusions. The Quran began to be compiled in the last 2 decades of the 7th century, with other versions continuing until the 9th century, according to Karl-Heinz Oleg. Dr. Gerhard Quinn and his wife Elizabeth Quinn have done the most work on this manuscript. They say that the oldest parchments and papers of this is by far the oldest manuscript in existence today, and it is the oldest manuscript. Yet more than half of the text is ambiguous letters, which need diacritical marks for understanding. Adding vowels helped correct the mistakes. Changes in the orthography are found in geographical tradition schools. So some of this is well known because these are well documented in later what we call hadith compilation schools. Now I'm going to go and come back to the Sana manuscript a little later. I'm going to look at the 2 layers because what they have found is this is a palimpsest. You'll see what I'm talking about in about 10 minutes. Let's continue on with the changes because this material here is probably the most damaging that we're coming across yet. And this is Dr. Dan Brubaker's material. He's a good friend of mine, and Mark and I both got our doctorates at the same place in Melbourne, Australia. And Dan Brubaker, along with Keith Small, Dr. Keith Small, we've been all working together on this material. They're the ones that I can say. There's names I can say. There's others whose names I'm not permitted to say, who are Arabists. And they don't want their names out in public. But Dr. Dan Brubaker doesn't mind you knowing who he is or what he's been doing. This is his doctoral thesis that came out in 2014. And I introduced this at the debate I did in 2014. And we noticed when he went back and he started filming every one of these 6 manuscripts, he decided to film where there were corrections. Now, he was only expecting to find maybe 15, 20 corrections at the most. You'll see how many he found. Here are insertions, 390 insertions where words are put above the line. Can you see where the words have been put above the line at a later date? What does this do? Well, here's an example of the Topkapi manuscript. It says, "O you who believe, repent until you are given by it sincerely." Today, it now says, "O you believe, turn unto Allah in sincere repentance." It completely changes the text. So there's an insertion that changes the text. Oh boy, you can't even see this one. We'll have to go over it. Sorry about that. But their name Allah is introduced at a different part. Here, I can't even see what this is. You'll have to read this on your computer. It's been washed out here. Here's a case where you have the Surah 23:86. It originally lacked the word al-Sabah, and then it says, "Say who is the Lord of the seven." So the seven is been introduced above the line. There it is right there, al-Sabah. The seven heavens. That's where we get seven heavens from. But it wasn't there in the original text. Surah 49 verse 15, it originally had the word mu'minu, which means they believe, but then a later scribe added the letter nun, changed the word to mu'minun, which means believers, and that's what we now have in the Hafs text, which is the canonized text that we use today. Then he found 390 erasers. You can see where they completely erased words, letters, which changes the word. These ones, we don't know what they have erased. Of course, this one, a single word was erased between the words two-third and the night. Unfortunately, we will never know what the word was which was erased. But this is the standard text today. So whatever they erased, they wanted to get rid of it at a later date so that it amalgamated itself with what then became the standard text. Husayni manuscript, Surah 49, Ayah 6, something is erased after the word fasaka. Also, while for this verse, the word fasaka is used in this manuscript, the word fasaku is used instead in the 1924 Hafs text that we use today. Here you see an eraser, which I can't show you because I have no idea what that was because it's been erased. Again, another eraser, somewhere between you all and of whom, it was another word, complete word that's been erased, changing the text completely. Here's another center eraser in chapter 26, verse 72. Words were erased after the word what and before the words do you worship. We will never know what those two words were. What a pity. And then he found 506 erasers overwritten. So they erased entire lines and they wrote over top. Here's an example of an overwriting in the Petropolitanus there in Paris. Here's an example of an overwriting again in the Petropolitanus. Here's an example of in St. Petersburg. This is a later manuscript, not part of the original 6. This is one in the St. Petersburg manuscript in Russia. They're on Surah 7, Ayah 189. And then they had overwriting without erasure. They just wrote over top. They didn't even care if you could see what was written unbelief. These are a little bit easier for us to see what's been changed because the writing is still there when you put it under ultraviolet light. Here's 70 verse 32. They in the text is written over top, replacing something which is in this case not discernible because of the change. It now agrees with the 1924 Quran, the Hafs text. Overwriting without erasure, Sana Musaf Sharaf. There you can see chapter 3 verse 104 where the commanding reads now the commanding has been changed and put over top. Then they found 500. He found 500 intentional changes directly over portions. These are coverings. Do you see these coverings? Can you see the coverings there? They just covered. Wouldn't you love to pick up and see what's written underneath? If we'd ever have access to these men, we could see what they've tried to cover. But in every case, they are standardizing the text. And these are done hundreds of years after the original text. Are you seeing that? Hundreds of years. This text, the Topper text, is 705. These are done in the 9th and the 10th century. We guess, it may be even later. Covering of the Husayni Cairo text, there you can see Surah 2, 187. Covers something between the words so eat and until. In the 1924 it reads eat and drink until the white thread of dawn appears. What's missing? We don't know because it's been covered over. Covering of the Husayni text again in Surah 2, Ayah 191 to 193. I'm going to go over these quickly because otherwise I'll put you to sleep. These are for those who are serious. You need to go and look at them and then we'll give you them because by August we'll have 4,000 to give you. We're up to 4,000 now. In 2014, we only had 2,000. And this is all going to be available in August of this year. Here is selective coverings overwritten, 210, writings over top, where they wrote and then they wrote over top a completely different word or sets of words. And then they had these tapings. And when Dan looked at it, he thought maybe because there was damage, but when he looked on the backside, there was no damage whatsoever. It's obviously they were censoring something here. And here you can see a taping. There's a taping. There's a taping. Look here. Tapings all over the page. 5 different places on just one page itself. So obviously what we conclude is, at this time in 2014, there were 2,200 corrections. They are all consonant ruzum. Getting back to your point, we'll explain what that means. None of them are diacritical marks. This has nothing to do with diacritical marks. There were no diacritical marks in any of these manuscripts. You notice? None of these are vowelization. You didn't see any dam or kasra or fatha in any of these. This has nothing to do with vowelization. And they're not dagat alifs. Dagat alifs were introduced in the 9th century. None of this has to do with dagat alif differences. Thus, they change the meaning of the text. They continue up until the 9th century. Thus, they are all intentional. They bring about a later standardization, which means they have a political agenda. All written by humans. Now, Western scholars like Dorosh, Bowring, Conrad, Peters, Stein, Shoemaker, these are the top men in their field. They all conclude that the earliest Musafs begin to appear in the 8th century. The Muslim scholars like Ekmeluddin and Ihsanuddin and Tayyar al-Tukurich conclude that the earliest Musafs begin to appear in the 8th century. Islamic Awareness, the largest Muslim website that deals with manuscript evidence, they're the ones that have all the manuscripts on their website. They have finally had to conclude since 2014, since that debate, that they all now exist in the 8th century or later. Isn't that interesting? Even they have now had to conclude that they're all later manuscripts. And the latest research shows that even these Muslims have 7 forms of corrections dating up until the 9th century. Therefore, some Muslims no longer do have an eternal Quran. They can't say that anymore. They cannot say that it was sent down. They cannot say that it was complete in 650, and they cannot say it's not been changed. There are hundreds. There are not just hundreds, there are thousands of changes. We're up to 4,000 already. So, who was Muhammad and what's his purpose? If you've been here last hour, you'll see why I say that. Because if this is all from the 8th century on, none of this has to do with Muhammad. And I said this back in the debate in 2014, and Shabir Ali got quite upset with me for saying that. He says, I hope you're doing that tongue-in-cheek. And I said, no, I'm not. We're putting the gauntlet down. That means Muhammad had nothing to do with the Quran. This all came way after Muhammad. And it continues to be changed and changed up until the 10th century. So I turned to Shabir Ali and I said, so where is your Quran from? Tell me the date for your Quran. You know what the date is for the Quran that he's using today? Does anybody know what the date is? 1924. 94 years ago is when the Quran was finalized. I turned to Shabir Ali and I said, Prince Philip is older than your Quran, and he's still living. And that's exactly what the crowd did. He was not amused, and since then he will not debate me. But it's not because of that. He can't debate me. There's no way they can debate this. How would you debate this when we have all the manuscripts now available for us to look at? And he has no idea what we're coming out with in August. In August, it'll all be out there so you can put it on your computer. We'll give it so all of you can have it on your computer. Yeah, Scott?
Is the Birmingham significant?
Hold on.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm not going to do that. Let me just tell you actually very quickly. What are the dates for the Birmingham manuscripts? 568 to 745. Okay, what's the problem with those dates right there?
Well, it's before Muhammad, before his ministry.
Before he was born. He was born in 570. But even the latest date, let's just go with the latest date. Yeah. What's wrong with it? When was the Quran put together? 652. If the latest date is 645, you're 7 years before Uthman.
Yeah.
But see, carbon dating is very inexact, and when you have to go with what they call the bell curve. And when you go with the bell curve, it's the median date is the strongest date. So the bell curve for that puts it about 610, which is when Muhammad started receiving his revelation. So this all precedes his revelation, but that's not the worst. Wait till you'll see what we're going to show you. We have now 4 labs that are now looking at manuscripts, and I'm just going to show you one from Sana manuscript, and they all predate Muhammad in case up until they even go as early as 443. That's a whole 100 years before Muhammad. So be careful with carbon dating. It'll come around to sting you. But all of these manuscripts had changes in them. These changes are razm changes, not simple diacritical marks or vowelizations. They continue to be changed for hundreds of years. There was an intentional standardization of the text. Thus, this again proves there has been intentional human intervention. That's what we're getting at. These are all intentional human interventions. This has nothing to do with God. This has nothing to do with Muhammad. This has nothing to do with Uthman. This is much later changes. Now let's look at the Sana manuscript. This Sana manuscript is probably the most exciting one. Dr. Asma Hilali finally came out with the findings last August in her book called the Sana manuscript. The problem with the Sana manuscript is it has a lower text that is now starting to leak through. When they washed it off, this is animal skin, this happens often, whenever you use a manuscript that is very valuable, but it's very expensive, you don't want to throw it away when things go wrong, you then wash it off and write over top, because it's made out of animal skin. And it takes an awful long time to cure. So they would wash off the manuscripts, and of course when you wash it off, you don't see the lower manuscripts. Hundreds of years later, that ink starts to bleed through. So when you look at it, you can see the ink there. So they put it under ultraviolet light, and now they're splitting the two texts. This is done at Columbia University, it's also done at the Sorbonne. And they're dating the lower text to 671 to 705, and the upper text from 705 on. Now, let's just go right through here. Possibly they're finding that these two texts do not agree, the lower and the upper texts. Possibly a text has faded, maybe it is inaccurate or needed corrected, maybe the text was obsolete. Or number 4, possibly the text was a nascent form of the later upper text. So let's go through it. You have 4 major scholars who have looked at it, actually 5. You have Gerd Puin, Dr. Elizabeth Puin, Dr. Sadeghi, and Dr. Gudarzi. The last 2 are Muslim, and then you have Asma Hilali, who is also Muslim. This is her book right here. Now, you don't have to read the whole book. I'll summarize it for you. It's all right there on that one page. Let's go on. What they're finding is this. The lower text has 63 verses underneath. It's only made up of 63 verses, the lower text. Within those 63 verses, there are 70 variants from the Quran that we have today. So more variants than there are verses. So Hilali believes that these are nothing more than a reading circle. That's what she calls it, a reading circle. You all know what that means? That means these are students who are just writing their material, and that's why they had to be erased off. That was her conclusion on this. Dr. Elizabeth Puin says absolutely not. The lower text is neither Uthmanic nor from Ibn Masud's Codex, so she concludes that the lower text was in the process of being corrected and made more precisely canonical. And they finally gave up because there were too many corrections, so they just erased it and wrote over top. Thus, the 2 layers were stages in the process of canonization. She suggests that the corrections predate the upper text and were so many that at some stage the corrector abandoned the corrections and the text was palimpsested. And that's what a palimpsest is. It's 2 different texts, one above the other. Now, when you look at the lower text, you will see, and these are the ones over here, the lower text, and these are the upper texts. So the lower text, 63 verses, they do not agree with the upper text, and they certainly don't agree with the Quran that we have today. Verbs and nouns are left out 25 times. Articles are different, participle differences, conjunction differences, prepositional differences. 29 times it has isolated letters, expression differences, entire sentences 16 times are different than the Quran we have today. And you can see some of the examples here. I don't want to go through all the time. You can go read my PowerPoint to see the differences here. But you will see that they change the meaning of the text over and over again. Here you have Allah with their money and themselves has been changed to did jihad struggle in the name of Allah. It completely changes the text and the meaning. But know that they did not escape Allah and His Prophet. Now has been changed to, but know that you cannot escape Allah. Can you see how that changes the theology as well as the meaning? They've exchanged the signs of Allah in their oath for a small price and averted from the way of Allah. Now has been changed to they have exchanged the signs of Allah for a small price and averted people from His way. And why don't you fight a people who broke their oaths and they were the first to start the aggression and they intend to drive out the Prophet? Now in the text it's been completely convoluted so that it reads it the other way around. Here you have these are those whose deeds fell in this world and the next has been changed to for those their deeds fell worthless. Can you now understand? They've added the word worthless onto that. And here you can see they struggled and with anyone has now changed that completely from they do jihad in the name of Allah and did not fear anyone but Allah has now been changed to perform the salat and give zakat and fear none but Allah. That's not even in the original text. A complete different phrase has been added, which is part of the 5 pillars of Islam. Allah does not forgive them. Indeed, Allah does not guide has been changed to Allah will not forgive them because they disbelieve in Allah and His Prophet and Allah does not guide. So Allah and Muhammad are now added into the text, proving that Muhammad was introduced at a later date, which makes sense with the archaeological evidence if you're here in the last hour. You seek welcome has been changed to and greet those in them. So you can see, we'll just go right through here. You can see the upper text then. Look at all the differences here in the upper text from the Quran. It's not just the lower text that doesn't agree. Even the upper text doesn't agree with the Quran we have today. Conclusions, the lower text is dated to the late 7th century, and there's a 50-year gap between the two layers. This could suggest that the upper text is a later correction of the lower text, or one could question the dating of the lower text, since ink cannot be dated, only the skin of the animal can. They're saying 671, but how did they come to that conclusion? They won't tell us how they came to 671. You cannot date ink, for one very good reason. Ink is an amalgamation of many different pigments from many different areas and many different eras. So that's why you don't date ink. You only date the skin. And you can only date the skin of when the death of the animal, because that's when the oxidation starts to take place, and that's why you have to be careful about the dates. So I would suggest that this is probably much closer to 705. More than likely it's in the last 2 decades, between 680 and 700, during the time of Abd al-Malik, which fits exactly with what we're finding with the Dome of the Rock, with the coins, and also with the protocols from what we talked about in the last hour. All of those are introduced in 691. That's when Muhammad's, the first time we have any reference to Muhammad is on the protocols, is on the coins, and is on the Dome of the Rock. We have no reference to Muhammad before that, which is the same time that the lower text would have been introduced. But isn't it interesting, Muhammad's not in the lower text. He's introduced in the upper text in 705. Can you see how it all fits together? The documentary evidence supports the archaeological evidence, supports the documentary evidence, supports the same timeline. Yeah, Mike. This is all, the paleography is what they're now using because they're now dismissing you'll see why, because the carbon dating is so inexact. We'll get to that. Hold on to your question. These are variants in the upper text as well. This suggests the standard text has not been canonized even by the early 8th century. It still was not canonized. Muhammad died in 632. We're now in 705. We're 70 years later and still we don't have a Quran. Ooh, it makes my job easy. The view that these texts are results of reading circles, this is Hilali's argument, is fallacious. First of all, because parchments are very expensive and would not be wasted on students. Secondly, Muslims would have preserved, why would they preserve students' texts? More than that, why, if these are students, then where's the original of what they're copying from? The scholars Ipwin, Sadeghi, and Gudazi all agree that there are many variants in the lower text, 70 verses, 63 variants. This proves that this is not a standard Quranic text. As Elizabeth Quinn says, this is a pre-Quranic text which doesn't correspond with any of the known 8th to 10th century narratives. All of the lower text variants change the meaning of the text. And that's what's so disturbing, and that's why Hilali has to say this is just students. You can see, she has to say that. She's a Muslim. I feel sorry for her, but this is not good academia. The biggest difficulty with these two layers of the palimpsests are, number one, they are the oldest Quranic fragments in existence today, number one. Number two, all the other extant manuscripts are more recent, so why are these layered palimpsests the earliest ones? Where is the manuscript, the original Quran, from which this text is derived? Where is it? Where are those 9 manuscripts? Yeah, okay, so let's move on. Are these two palimpsest layers an example of the nascent Quran in its early formation? Are either of these two layers parallel to the eternal tablets in heaven? Since these are so different from the Quran which we are using today, then where is the original manuscript for the 1924 Hafs text used around the world? Finally, both of these two layers prove once again that there was intentional human intervention in the Quranic text from the very beginning. I'm going to say that again, intentional human intervention. Meanwhile, let's talk about the radiocarbon dating. Now we'll get back to your question, Scott. The 4 carbon dating lab reports. This is because of the Birmingham manuscripts. No one bothered to ask what else was happening outside of the Oxford lab. Julian Christian Robin in 2015 wrote his book to answer that. And he said, look at the carbon dating from the other labs. This is from Lyon in France, from Kiel in Germany, from Zurich in Switzerland, and the Oxford labs from which the Birmingham manuscript was taken. And this is what he showed. Look at this graph here. Now that's Muhammad's life right there. Look at all these manuscripts. This is just from one manuscript. This is just the Sana text. But from different pages of the Sana text. Take a look at the dates. The radiocarbons in this one go way down to 400s up to 550. Muhammad wasn't born until 565. Sorry, 568. Sorry, 570. I'll get it on the 3rd try. He wasn't born here until here, 570. All of these, look at how they predate Muhammad's life. proving that this material was in existence long before Muhammad, which makes sense. Look at the Birmingham Folio, Surah 18, Surah 19, Surah 20. What's it talk about? It talks about the 7 sleepers. It talks about Moses. It talks about Dul Qarnayn, who is Alexander the Great. Every one of these are borrowed texts. All of these were around since the 2nd century. Sorry, except for Dul Qarnayn. That would have been 630. The early the mid 6th century, early 7th century. Can you see all of these are earlier texts that they borrowed? No wonder they're much later, much earlier. No wonder these are the texts that from which these are described. And that's why I would suggest the carbon datings are really helping us. But I'm not going to go with the carbon dating. I'll go with Mike. We need to go back to paleographical material. That's a lot more secure. But we got it coming and going. That's what's lovely about this argument. We got them both ways. So 4 of the datings are from the 4 different labs. Note that these all have 95% probability range. When using the bell curve, we know that the highest probabilities are near the center of the bars and not the ends. Therefore, Sana B, C, and D manuscript pages were dated in Lyon. The Birmingham Folio was dated in Oxford. All 4 Sana A examples dated at 4 separate laboratories completely predate Muhammad, the Quran, and Islam. That's why they're so devastating. All the folios, including the Sana A, B, C, D, and the Birmingham folios, predate the Uthmanic recension, the first Quran. Therefore, something is seriously wrong. So if the Muslims are going to give the Birmingham folio, just show them this graph.
Couldn't they have just written an old parchment?
An old parchment? You mean an early parchment?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay, an early parchment. The problem is you're still going to have the same difficulty. Why would you hold it there for 100 years and not use it? Not when it's that valuable. And why is it that all of them are dated that early? Okay?
Okay.
Solution. Dr. Abduri comes up with this solution. This is what he came up with about a month ago. There is something wrong with the carbon dating. The parchment was being stored for up a long time. That's what you're trying to say, before using up to 200 years? Okay? You go talk with Dr. Mark Dury about that. The traditional dating of the Quran is wrong. The Quran was really created much earlier, sometime between 450 to 500 AD, and the Muhammad story was then attached to it much later. Or could this be a combination of the above? My solutions, I agree with what Mark Dury is saying. There's possibly a problem with carbon dating due to its inaccuracies. Due to the expensive nature of the animal skins, it is highly unlikely that these skins were stored for a long time before their use. There's no point to it to begin with. The traditional dating of the Quran is probably at fault because it comes from us from the 9th century, which is simply too late to be credible. And since Muhammad is not listed in the earliest dated folios, this suggests that the Quran is copied from borrowed material, which would naturally predate Muhammad, the Quran, and thus Islam. And that makes sense.
Where does it come from?
Now let's go back. The RC datings of the ABCD, well, what I would like to say, you can read this later, but what I would say is, where is that first manuscript? Where are the first 9 manuscripts? More than that, let's now look at the manuscripts today, because if you have a problem with the earliest manuscripts, what about the Qurans we have in our hands today? The Arab Qurans. I'm not talking about the translations. Let's look at the Arab Qurans, the Arabic Qurans that we have today. The Arabic skeletal script is the razm. This is getting back to your point. You need to look at the razm. Now this is for those who don't speak Arabic. We have 3 vowelizations called the fatah, which is the ah sound, the dhamma, which is the u sound, and the kasra, which is the e sound. But more than that, notice if you look at this manuscript here from the 8th century, notice it has no dots above and below the line, and it has no fatah, dhamma, or kasra, okay? This is only razm. These are only consonantal words. That's the Sana manuscript. Here you have another example. This is the Topkapi. Can you see it has no diacritical marks, and it has no dhamma, kasra, or fatah. So, why is that important? Here's another one, an early Shiite Quran. This has no diacritical marks, no dhamma, kasra, or fatah. Here are the 28 letters of the Arabic alphabet. When you look at the 28 letters, there are 6 unique letters. The alif, the kaf, the lam, the mim, the ha, the waw. Those are the 6 unique letters. Those ones you don't need any dots with, okay? All the other of the 22 of the 28, you need dots to understand them. What do I mean by that? So for the other 22, you have to have dots to know. Let's take that smiley face. You put 1 dot above it, and it becomes a nun. You put another dot above it, and it becomes a ta. You put a 3rd dot above it, and it becomes a tha. Now, let's take that same smiley face and put 1 dot below it, becomes a ba. You put another dot below it, and it becomes a ya. So here you have na, ta, tha, ba, ya. It could be 5 different letters. That's why you need the dots. None of these manuscripts have those dots. So which means you have 5 different derivations per letter. Can you imagine what you do then when you put them into words? Let's look at those 3 smiley faces and put them together. Just those 3 smiley faces together with no dots, you can get 19 different words. But without the dots, you've lost all 19 words. Okay? Therefore, when you look at the variants, you need to look and see what we're talking about. Now, these are the ones that we have now. This is Hatun, my colleague. She now has 31 of these Qurans that she has found in Yemen, in Jordan, in Morocco. Looking around the marketplaces, she's come up with 31 different Arabic Qurans. Not 1, not 2, but 31. These are them right here. These are modern Qurans. You can buy these in the marketplace today, okay? All in Arabic, no translation. When you look at them, you will find that they come from 37 different readers. These are the readers here. These are their teachers who all come from this area here. But these readers, take a look at them. When you look at them, you will notice all the ones that we use today, the Hafs that I keep on talking about, is from this man right down here. Look at his date. You can't see it, it's too far away. He died in 805. That's the 9th century. So all of these readers here, every one of them are from the 8th and 9th century. None of them are from the 7th century. And every one of them has a different Quran. And every one of them changes the Quran. This man here has 1,900 differences between the Quran. Al-Da'bazi. Here's, and I'm looking at, it's hard to read here. Orbil, he has, this one here, Kulum has 1,700 difference. Hisham has 1,300 difference. Ibn Duban has 140 difference. Here you have Khalad has 2,000 differences. Here you have Abu al-Harith, he has 5,000 differences. If you add them all up together, we are now up to 60,000 differences between these different readings. 60,000 difference, that's what we're at right now. We're probably going to get up to 80 to 90,000 by the time we're ended. And we have Arab scholars now working on this as we speak. 60,000 differences. We took these 26 of these Qurans down to Speaker's Corner 2 years ago. We almost didn't leave the corner. We then took them down again last year, last July. They tried to stop us from leaving the corner. Go up on Fandor Films, you'll see what happened. We had to protect them because they were so angry, because Muslims have never heard this before. They have always heard there's only one Quran, and that the Quran is exactly the same in every country all over the world. We have come up with 60,000 differences looking at 31 of the modern Qurans today. Now let's take a look and see why they're different. Now most Muslims just look at this one, Surah 1 Ayah 4, and say, see, it's just Maliki versus Maliki. The owner versus the king, it's the same difference. You need to look and see, and this is going to take, we have 70 of these, we're not going to go through all of them. But if you have time, go through and see just how they change the text. Just with the diacritical marks in every case. We, God versus arbitrarily forgiven. We, or is it arbitrary that the sin is given? Here you have a difference in Surah 2, Ayah 1 to take you versus they took and have taken. Now, do they take this place now, or has it already been taken? A take has been addressed into a plural form at a later text. Here you have the difference in Hafs and the Warsh from takuluna to yakuluna. You say that Abraham did this, or they say. Let's go ahead and get, there's a much more damaging ones coming up. Repelling versus defending, completely different context. Here you have he versus we will remove. Here you have Allah made sure she was taken care of by Zachariah. And here you, and then said he, Zachariah, took charge of her. So did Allah put Zachariah in charge of Mary, or does Zachariah take charge himself? That has huge significance for Zachariah itself. Do the believers teach the book, or they simply know the book? Well, many people can know a book, but they are not capable of teaching it. So that changes that context. Now here you have, it's up there because they change it from the plural form to a second masculine singular form. Who seeks their return? So it doesn't even agree with the rest of the verse. In Surah 3, Ayah 136, the prophets simply fight, or were they killed? Well, if I was a prophet, I'd rather fight than be killed. I'd like to know which way I'm going to go. So you can see how this really does change the meaning. I know, I'm right, I see you there. Let me just go through these real quickly. In every case, you can see it changes the meaning. Now we have, I'm just putting about 20 up here in the PowerPoint. We have over 70. There's no way we can get all 60,000 up there. So this is our final conclusions. Let's do this. To ascertain where the Quran came from, we now know that it's not created. We now know that it was not complete. We know that it was full of errors. Muslims are looking, we need to find a mid-7th century Quran that's complete and unchanged. Those are the 5 areas we looked at. The second 2 compilations prove that there are 2 completely different Qurans, even within the first 20 years of Muhammad's death. The 6 manuscripts prove that they are all late, none of them are complete, and they don't agree with the Quran we have today. The 2 layers of Sana palimpsest shows that even between the 7th and 8th century it got changed, and they still don't agree with the Quran we have today. The 4 laboratories show us that much of the material that we have just on the Sana manuscripts predates not only Muhammad's life, it predates the Quran, and it predates Islam. When we look at the 31 different Qurans, we know that even Qurans today don't agree with each other. And take a look, every one of them goes back to the 8th and 9th century. That means these mistakes have been there for over 1,000 years, and we've not been told. Why have Muslims not told us this? So what does this prove? Well, in every case, we know that the Quran was created by men. The Quran was not sent down to Muhammad. It was not completed by Uthman. It was intentionally changed. It was finally compiled in 1924. The Quran can be found in 31 different Arabic texts, even today, which cast doubt on the Quran. Now let's look at the Bible. Oh, I don't have it up here. I'm sorry about that. When you look at this, and what I want to do, now we've gone through an awful lot of material, and people ask, how can we learn this material? All of this material we are now teaching you. You can come and join up and find out this. We now have a course called the Fander course. It starts in September and goes to April. Those of you who want to take that course, I'm going to have there's a list back here on that table there. Sign your name and please sign your email so I can read it, and we will send you the registration. It costs $265 for the whole year. It comes to you every Tuesday from 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock in the morning, where you come to your computer through Zoom webinar. We're in 21 countries. We already we've trained up 400 students in 21 countries already. Next year, we already have 300 signed up. We can have up to 1,000. So there's plenty of places for you. It will zoom right onto your computer. Then you get you'll get for every lecture, for every Tuesday, you will get and you will be able to keep. But this material has not been taught in any seminary. It's not been taught in any Bible school. It's much too dangerous to teach it in seminary and Bible school. But we want to make sure that you all get it so that you can learn it and you can use it. Be careful how you use it. This lecture and the one in the previous hour, this is really it's very confrontational and it's controversial. Muslims will attack you if you say this publicly. So let us do it, okay? You need to learn it so you know it. So what we're going to do, a lot of the material that we're training is also apologetic. How to defend the attacks against us, how to defend the attacks against the Bible, and how to defend against attacks against Jesus Christ. That's the material you need to know the most. We will also teach you the polemical material so that you feel happy. But please be careful how you use it, okay? So if you do want to sign up, just go to the paper there, put your name in there and email, and then we'll get you the registration. Yeah.
What's the name of that again? Fander?
P-F-A-N-D-E-R, Fander course. And if you want to go up to the table up, that's my table, you'll see some, if you want to just get one of my prayer cards, on the back is Fander Films and the Fander course. But give me your email today and I'll make sure I get all the material to you, okay?